Images from the scene are published in the American media. Angry British authorities say that it could undermine the investigation.
I'm Rico Hizon in Singapore. All program. More victims of the bombing in Manchester. So far, 14 have been named, but police say they know the identities of everyone who was killed. And a moment of silence for the Manchester victims at the Europa League final between Manchester United and Amsterdam in Stockholm.
Live from our studios in London and Singapore. This is BBC World News. It's Newsday.
Hello and welcome to the programme. Police here in the UK say they're investigating a network of people in connection with Monday night's bombing in Manchester, which killed 22 and injured more than 60. The father and a brother of the suicide bomber, Salman Abedi, have been detained in Libya, and other arrests have taken place in the UK. Meanwhile, British police have condemned the publication by the New York Times of leaked photos and information from the scene of the bombing. Our correspondent, Gavin Hewitt, starts our coverage.
Late central Manchester, and a raid on a block of flats, part of a huge operation to discover the network of the Manchester bomber. The police believe he stayed there as recently as 7 o'clock evening, the night of the attack. Today's operation involved armed units, some wearing military clothing.
Got to the front door and was greeted by an armed police officer with a helmet, face mask and machine gun. I asked him what's happening, he just said operations out.
To gain access to the apartment, they blew down a door. Other police units arrived looking for any signs of a bomb factory. There have been raids in different parts of the city, this one involving armed units. Police regard themselves as in a race against time, trying to find other members of the network to prevent further attacks. This was just one of a number of police operations carried out in Manchester today.
You will be aware that the level of activity in this investigation is intense and is continuing at a fast pace. I think it's very clear that this is a network that we are investigating, and as I've said, it continues at a pace.
Late afternoon and a new arrest. This street in Wigan, a man detained. Police say he was carrying a suspicious package. The UK, now a country on high. This was Reading this morning, and this the Scottish Parliament in Edinburgh. Outside Downing Street, soldiers were patrolling alongside police. Eventually, 3,800 troops will be deployed. Elsewhere, the changing of the guard at Buckingham Palace was cancelled. A nation living with the expectation of an imminent attack.
We have now gone to a critical level in terms of the threat. Operation Tempora has now been invoked, and that means that there will be additional military personnel coming to backfill the armed police officers so that they can support other areas.
All of these special operations are aimed at discovering the circle linked to Salman Abedi, the Manchester bomber. It has become clear that he was part of a terror cell. Police today were examining his house in South Manchester. Abedi may have been the mule, a bomb carrier. The bomb makers may still be at large. On Monday, Abedi carried out a suicide attack at the Manchester Arena, 20 killed and 64 injured. Today, the New York Times revealed pictures from the crime scene in the foyer of the Manchester Arena. The pictures appear to show the remnants of the bomber's backpack, the metal fragments used in the attack, and a possible detonator. British security officials expressed astonishment and disbelief that the pictures had been leaked. Tonight, Manchester is a city that knows there may be people in its midst who've planned mass murder and may strike again. Gavin Hewitt, BBC News, Manchester.
Well, the UK's National Police Chiefs Council has issued a statement about the leak of those images in the US. The organisation says when trust is breached, it undermines our investigations. This damage is even greater when it involves the disclosure of potential evidence in the middle of a major counter-terrorism investigation. And the transatlantic row escalated further when the Mayor of Greater Manchester, Andy Burnham, also expressed his firm disapproval of the leaks.
It worries me greatly, and in fact I made known my concerns about it to the US ambassador. It's not acceptable to me that here there is a live investigation taking place. We cannot have information being put in the public domain that's not in the direct control of the British police and security services.
Andy Burnham there. Well, I spoke to our correspondent, Wira Davies, who's outside Greater Manchester Police headquarters for the latest on this investigation.
Well, the police here are trying to focus on the investigation, which is trying to find the bomber's associates. We now know, of course, that he more than likely did not act alone. He had help in amassing that bomb, in putting it on, and certainly the technology behind the bomb probably came from somewhere else. So they're trying to find the bomb factory, find the bomb maker, and they're arresting and speaking to the associates of Abedi. They've now arrested 7 people in total. 2 more arrests in the last hour or two, both in Manchester and actually further afield towards the UK Midlands, towards the Midlands, a town called Nuneaton. So there are arrests being made, but there's also a great deal of frustration that the police here are playing catch-up because of all of the leaks, especially from American intelligence, and they're not in some ways in complete control of the investigation.
Yes, Wira, because those leaks, we're seeing those images from the bomb itself in American media. Those leaks are coming from somewhere. What reaction so far to that?
Incredible amounts of anger, not just from the police but from UK politicians. The first big leak, for example, was the naming of bomber himself. Now, the police here behind me at Greater Manchester Police Headquarters wanted to keep that name out of the press and public domain because they felt that to have revealed the name would have alerted his associates from American intelligence sources via the American media, and the police here had no choice but to reveal the name before they wanted to. And now these images, these crucial images of the bomber's apparent equipment, detonators, his modus operandi, they also appear to have been leaked from intelligence that's been shared by the UK and the Americans, and it's made its way into the American media. And British politicians and British police are incredibly angry about that.
Wira Davies there speaking earlier to Kasia outside Greater Manchester Police headquarters. Well, investigators are building up a clearer picture of the Manchester bomber. It's thought Salman Abedi, who was born and raised in Britain, returned to the UK from Libya just days before the attack. Our special correspondent Ed Thomas reports now on his background and what may have motivated him.
Suicide bomber Salman Abedi, an extremist who attacked the city of his birth. Now investigators surround his home, like everyone here, wanting answers.
Yeah, you will see a lot when everything walks past and everything.
Saeed knew Abedi. He'd watch him come and go from Manchester to Libya. Now he can't believe what his neighbour did.
Unbelievably disgusting, to be honest. As FIFA and Muslim, yeah, and a Libyan as well. Right, to us, obeying the law of the country is the most priority #1. That's what the Prophet teaches us.
And some talk of erratic behaviour, of Abedi chanting in the street.
He was shouting out the Quran in Islamic. See, I don't know their language.
And the BBC has been told a black flag with Arabic writing hung outside his home. Many had no idea what it meant.
I remember seeing some sort of flag outside.
And was Islamic writing on it?
Well, I didn't really look at it, it was just...
Was it English writing?
No.
a community worker who didn't want to go on camera, has told us that two separate people who knew Salman Abedi at college rang years ago. They said he was supporting terrorism and had expressed a view that being a suicide bomber was okay. Greater Manchester Police will not comment on those claims. And what about the Manchester bomber's family? This is his brother Hashim, now under arrest in Libya for supporting so-called Islamic State. Then there's Abedi's father, Ramadan, affiliated to extremists, the Libyan Islamic Fighting Group. On his Facebook page, he praised fighters in Syria linked to Al-Qaeda. Today he gave an interview in Libya, minutes before he was detained, defending himself and son.
Salman doesn't belong to any organization. I know this about him. He doesn't hide it from me. I always discuss things with him. I'm sure and I believe that Salman wouldn't do such a thing. But there are hidden hands behind this, security organizations, in order to harm the Libyan community, especially the youth. Salman did not travel to Syria. The evidence is that I have seen his 2 passports, and he never hides anything from me. He did not travel to Syria.
There was no apology, and before he left South Manchester, we're told he'd sometimes lead prayers at this mosque.
He's there all when the prayer is happening. He's a guy who announces it like and says, Allahu Akbar.
Police now want to know if anyone else knew about Salman Abedi's plans and his father's beliefs. Salman Abedi's father, he was well known in the mosque.
Oh yeah, everyone knows him. Everyone from our age, you know, they know.
A good man.
He's a good man.
Hayal Kazal is close to the trustees at Didsbury Mosque. He had no idea of the family's extremist links. We know he's connected to extremist fighters in Libya.
Right.
Groups close to Al-Qaeda.
Right. To us, they didn't show it to us. You know, like, if someone go pray in the mosque.
But is that a problem, though? That
I think people who connect...
people like yourself, good people, don't know who they are with.
Now we go back again. The mosque trustees have to do more about that. Leader of communities have to be sit down together and they say a lot of work need to be...
Tonight, Salman Abedi was a coward whose crime had no place in their religion. A man willing to kill in the city that was once his home. Ed Thomas, BBC News, South Manchester.
You're watching Newsday on the BBC, live from London and Singapore. Still to come on the program. Philippine President Rodrigo Duterte warns he may widen martial law as the security forces continue their battle against its groups.
Also coming up on the program, the Pope and the President. Donald Trump visits the Vatican for what he calls the honor of a lifetime, but the two haven't always been friends.
In the biggest international sporting spectacle ever seen, up to 30 million people have taken part in athletics events to aid Africa.
The first of what the makers of Star Wars hope will be thousands of queues started forming at 7 a.m.
Taunting which led to scuffles, scuffles to fighting, fighting to full-scale riot, as the Liverpool fans broke out of their area and into the Juventus enclosure. The Belgian police had lost control.
The whole world who will mourn the tragic death of Mr. Nehru Day. The Indian people from the day of independence.
The Oprah Winfrey Show comes to an end after 25 years and more than 4,500 episodes. The chat show has made her one of the richest people on the planet.
Geri Halliwell, otherwise known as Ginger Spice, has announced she's left the Spice Girls.
She's the one with the bounce, the go, girl power, not Geri. Why?
Welcome back, everyone. You're watching Newsday on the BBC. I'm Rico Hizon in Singapore.
And I'm Kasia Madeira in London. Our main story. More details emerge about Salman Abedi, the man behind the Manchester bombing. His father and brother are detained in Libya as police make further arrests.
Images from the scene of the bombing are published in the American media. Angry British authorities say this could undermine the investigation.
Well, so far, 14 of the 22 victims of Monday's bombing have been identified. They include 15-year-old Olivia Campbell. Police say that they know the identities of everyone who was killed, but among those not named so far is an off-duty policewoman who was at the concert. Her husband and 2 children survived, but they are being treated for injuries. Our special correspondent, Alan Little, has been finding out more about some of the victims.
As their names emerged today, one thing was inescapable: the extreme youth of so many. There is a special anguish in this, the carefree tenderness of the lives lost. Olivia Campbell from Bury was 15. Her family spent years frantically searching for her. Early today that she had died. Her mother Charlotte posted this message on Facebook. Safi Roussos was 8. She went to Tarleton Community Primary School in Lancashire. This morning her classmates at assembly sang "Don't Stop Believing." Her mother and sister are still in hospital.
She was loved by everyone, and her warmth and kindness will be remembered fondly. Safi was quiet and unassuming with a creative flair. Safi comes from a close, loving family, and we can only imagine what they're going through.
Marcin and Angelika Klis from Poland lived in York. This photograph shortly before the attack. They'd come to collect their daughters from the concert. Their girls lost both parents in an instant.
I've been a Deirdre Barlow superfan. She's always been my favourite character.
This is Martin Hett speaking to the BBC in 2015. He was 29, gregarious, full of enthusiasm. A friend wrote, "Our wonderful, icon, beautiful Martin didn't survive. He left this world exactly how he lived, centre of attention." Kelly Brewster was 32 and from Sheffield. She died shielding her 11-year-old niece from the blast. Her partner, Ian Winslow, wrote, "Kelly really was the happiest she had ever been. We had so many things planned together." Georgina Calendar had adored Ariana Grande since childhood and had met her. She was 18 and a second-year student of health and social care, planning a career committed to helping others. John Atkinson, who was 28 and from Bury, also studied health and social care. 1 in a million, his friends said, loved by so many, a true gentleman. Jane Tweddle Taylor was a school receptionist and a mother of 3 from Blackpool. She was waiting for a friend's daughter. She is irreplaceable, her colleagues said, bubbly, kind, welcoming, funny, generous. Nell Jones was 14 and described by her teachers as a bright and popular pupil, always smiling. It feels like the school has lost a sister, they said, not a classmate. Sorrel Leszkowski was also 14 and from Leeds. Her mother and grandmother were injured, her grandmother critically. Her sister survived without injury. Michelle Kiss was married to young children. She issued a statement saying, "For her life, she has been taken from us in the most traumatic way imaginable." Friends Lisa Lees and Alison Howe were waiting for their 15-year-old daughters. Both girls survived the blast, but their mothers died side by side. Look into these faces, and youth and optimism beam back at you. Children, young parents, leading normal, blameless lives. Alan Little, BBC News.
In other news, there have been 2 explosions at a busy bus terminal in the Indonesian capital, Jakarta. 2 suspected suicide bombers killed 3 police officers guarding a parade. 10 other people were injured in the blasts, which went off about 5 minutes apart. A police spokesman said the suspected bombers were male and their identities will be released later. A U.S. warship sails within 12 miles of artificial islands built up by China in the South China Sea. U.S. officials say it is the first such action under President Donald Trump. The officials, who were speaking on condition of anonymity, said the USS Dewey was traveling close to Mischief Reef in the Spratly Islands in a challenge to China's territorial claims. The The President of the Philippines, Rodrigo Duterte, has said martial law could be imposed across the whole country as security forces continue their battle against Islamist groups. The President has martial law in the southern island of Mindanao, which makes up roughly 1/3 of the country and is home to 20 million people. The army failed in an attempt to capture one of the leaders of the militants on Tuesday, some of whom have declared allegiance to the so-called Islamic State. The Islamists responded by killing the chief of police in the southern city of Marawi and taking several people hostage, including a Catholic priest. President Duterte, who is already well known for waging a violent campaign against drug dealers, and has warned he was willing to use similar methods against the extremists.
In this oath of office, which I promise to God and to the people, that I will protect and defend the country. And dito ako, if I think that you should die, you will die. If you fight us, you will die. If there's a chance, you will die. And if it means many people dying, so be it.
Philippine President Rodrigo Duterte. Donald Trump's first overseas trip gathers pace. He's currently in Brussels for a NATO summit. He faced several thousand protesters when he arrived. Earlier, the U.S. president was granted a short private audience with the Pope. Mr. Trump described his meeting at the Vatican as inspirational. Our North America editor John Sopel has the details.
Ever so slowly and flanked by the Swiss Guard, the lead preeminent superpower walked through the Vatican to meet the leader of one of the world's preeminent religions. And were there ever two more different people? Pope Francis' nearest hint of a smile, President Trump beaming. They sat across from each other in the pontiff's study as a job interview. But there were lighter moments. As Melania Trump was presented, the Pope wanted to know, do you feed him lots of petitza, a Slovenian cake? Her facial expression suggested she hadn't expected that as a question. The President gave the Pope bound copies of the works of Martin Luther King. The Pope gave the President some of his encyclicals, including, pointedly, one on the environment and the dangers of global warming.
After two world leaders have had a difficult discussion, the normal mantra is, there is more that unites us than divides us. That may well be true. But make no mistake, the divisions between the Pope and President Trump are significant.
During the election campaign, when Pope Francis visited the US-Mexico border, he said that people who choose to build walls and not bridges weren't Christian.
He actually said that maybe I'm not a good Christian or something.
Donald Trump said those comments were disgraceful.
No ban!
And in February, Trump had tried to introduce his travel ban from 6 mainly Muslim countries and suspended the refugee program. The Pope tweeted, "How often in the Bible the Lord asks us to welcome migrants and foreigners, reminding us that we too are foreigners." The visit concluded with the tour of the Sistine Chapel and the awe-inspiring Last Judgment by Michelangelo. The Vatican said the discussions had been cordial. A connection has been made. The President and First Lady have now arrived in Brussels ahead of tomorrow's NATO summit. Yes, he's warm to the organisation, but his determination to get member states to cough up more money is unchanged.
He really wants to persuade NATO members to step up and fully meet their obligations under burden share. The 2% of GDP was a target they all agreed to. I think you can expect the President to be very tough on them.
On the streets, thousands turned out to protest at Donald Trump's arrival. Feminists, immigration campaigners, trades unions. Welcome to Europe, Mr. President. John Sopel, Brussels.
Ousted South Korean leader Park Geun-hye has arrived at a court in Seoul to attend her second trial over a corruption scandal. Smith was impeached in March over accusations she allowed a close friend to extort money from companies in return for political favors.
The victims of Monday's attack in Manchester are being remembered. There were emotional scenes in Stockholm ahead of the Europa League final between Manchester United and the Dutch side Ajax. The players held a minute's silence ahead of the game to remember the victims of the attack. Well as the fans inside the stadium, there were also several thousand watching on a big screen back in Manchester. United won the final 2-0, and many of the players took to social media to dedicate the win to the people of the city and those affected by the attack. Manager Jose that he would return the trophy if it would bring back the victims. Our sports editor Dan Rowan reports from the Swedish capital.
United had a huge responsibility coming into this game this evening. The atrocity on Monday evening had rendered the result of tonight's Europa League final here in Stockholm almost irrelevant. And yet the human value of the occasion had been elevated. United's players fully aware that their club is a world-renowned symbol of the city of Manchester. They knew they had an opportunity to give something back. They had it here, and they duly delivered.
Dan Rowan there reporting, and more on that on Sport Today. And you've been watching Newsday on the BBC. I'm Rico Hizon in Singapore. Stay with us. India's gender divide. We'll be looking at why fewer women in urban areas are entering the workforce despite having one of the largest populations in the world.
And before we go, let's leave you with some of the images of the many, many tributes, the flowers, the words and the gifts collected in St Anne's Square in the very heart of Manchester. They were brought here by an endless stream of people throughout the day. They all want to express their sympathy and also their solidarity at the events of Monday evening. You've been watching the BBC. Thank you for joining us.